Chapter 1. The sun had bled its last gold across the western hills, a final, generous sigh that left the sky a deep and bruised violet. Down in the hollow where the village lay cupped between the earth's gentle palms, the light softened, pooling in the narrow lanes like spilled milk. One by one, the stars pricked through the fading tapestry of night, not with a sudden fire, but as if the velvet darkness was slowly wearing thin to reveal the brilliance beneath. The air, cool now against the skin, carried the day's ghosts, the sharp, herbal perfume of wild thyme crushed underfoot, the memory of sun, warmed stone, and from the coast a distant rhythmic murmur that was not quite sound but a feeling in the bones, the breathing of the sea. Along the winding paths, the simple, whitewashed homes began to glow from within, soft rectangles of amber where oil lamps were kindled against the gathering dark. In the small open square, paved with stones smoothed by generations of passage, Lyra settled onto a familiar bench. The chill of the stone seeped through the thin fabric of her homespun chiton, a cool, grounding presence she had known for more years than she could easily count. Her face, a lovely and intricate map of gentle lines, was turned toward the last remnants of the light. Her eyes, the color of still, deep water, held a quietness that was not emptiness, but a well of accumulated seeing. They had watched husbands go to sea and sons go to war. They had seen harvests fail and olives flourish. Resting in her lap, her hands were gnarled and eloquent, the knuckles like river-smoothed pebbles, the skin a fine parchment. They were hands that had kneaded dough, mended nets, soothed fevers, and for as long as anyone could remember, gestured toward the heavens to pull down the stars. A small circle had begun to form around her, an unspoken ritual as old as the village itself. A few of the elders, their faces etched with the day's toil but their postures softened in the twilight, found their usual places on the low wall. A young mother, her own face pale with the sweet exhaustion of new life, stood by the ancient olive tree, rocking the sleeping infant nestled in the crook of her arm, and at Lyra's feet, cross-legged on the cool stones, sat a child named Ilara. Her chin was propped in her hands, her gaze fixed on the old woman with an unshakable, luminous wonder. In Ilara's eyes, the nascent stars found a second, more intimate sky in which to shine. As the last villager settled, a quiet hush fell over the square, broken only by the chirr of a lone cicada and the baby's soft sigh. Lyra drew a slow breath, preparing to speak, and with it, a subtle, almost imperceptible sigh of her own escaped her lips. It was a sound so faint it was lost to every ear but her own. She was the keeper of these tales, the custodian of the celestial myths that gave shape to their nights and meaning to their seasons. It was her purpose. Yet, of late, the threads of that purpose felt thin and frayed within her own heart. She spoke of cosmic fire and divine dramas, but the inner light that had once sparked with every utterance felt distant. A quiet ache had taken root inside her, a sense of disconnect from the very magic she dispensed. The stories were still beautiful, but they felt like beautiful objects she held at arm's length, their textures familiar, but no longer truly felt. She let the sigh dissolve into the evening air and began. Her voice, when it came, was a soft current, melodious and warm, flowing into the stillness. It did not boom with the grandeur of the gods, but murmured with the intimacy of a lullaby. She spoke of Orion, not as the boastful, violent hunter of other tellings, but as a gentle shepherd, a patient soul whose love for his flock was so profound that the gods, in a rare act of tenderness, had lifted him into the sky to watch over a celestial fold. "His belt," she whispered, her gnarled finger tracing a line against the darkness, "is not a warrior's cinch, but the simple rope that held his pouch of cheese and olives. And the stars you see trailing behind him, Canis Major, Canis Minor, they are not hounds of the hunt, but his loyal sheepdogs, ever faithful, forever at his heels, their starry coats thick with the dust of the Milky Way." Her words painted the scene in thick, deliberate brushstrokes of sound. The villagers leaned in, the familiar tale washing over them like a gentle tide, soothing the aches of the day. Lyra felt their quiet attention, a balm against her own unspoken weariness. For a few moments the story held her too, its simple beauty a shelter from the strange hollowness inside her. She spoke until the shepherd and his dogs were clear and present in the sky above, their silent journey a comforting, steadfast presence. When she finished, the quiet returned, deeper this time. It was Ilara who broke it. The child looked up, her bright gaze shifting from the constellations back to Lyra's face. "Grandmother Lyra," she asked, her voice clear with the innocent honesty that only youth possesses, "do the gods still weave new stars, or are all the beautiful stories already told?" The question, so simple, so pure, landed in Lyra's heart with the weight of a fallen stone. It was not a child's idle query, it was the precise, unspoken question that haunted the edges of her own soul. Her gaze drifted from Ilara's face up to the vast, glittering expanse. The sky was immense, an endless ocean of possibility, and yet, within her, a small space felt terribly constrained. The grand narratives of the cosmos, the stories that had been her life's breath, had somehow become just that, stories, words, beautiful, polished, but inert. She looked at the shimmering dust of the galaxy, a river of light spilled across the heavens, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt like a stranger standing on its banks. The child's question had not offered an answer, but it had illuminated the quiet path of a new and gentle quest, not to find a new story for the village, but to find a way to rekindle the starlight within herself. Chapter 2. The day's last warmth receded from the village stones, a slow exhalation that left behind the cool mineral scent of coming night. Dusk was not a sudden curtain fall here, but a deliberate seeping, a bleeding of cobalt into the indigo wash of the sky. From her place in the arch of her stone doorway, Lyra watched the transformation, feeling the chill rise from the cobbled path and creep into the worn wool of her shawl. The sounds of the day were folding themselves away for sleep. In the distance, the last plaintive bleat of a goat being led to its pen, a sound as familiar as her own breathing. A door latched somewhere down the lane, a soft clatter of wood on wood. The air, growing thin and sharp, carried the scent of wood smoke from a dozen hearths, a clean, biting fragrance that spoke of banked embers and the deep communal quiet of the evening. Leaning her shoulder against the rough-hewn frame, Lyra felt the stillness settle, a peace so profound it was almost a presence, a companion in the gathering dark. Then the first one appeared. a single tentative fleck of silver in the high vault above the eastern hills. Lyra's breath caught for a moment, an old, ingrained habit of reverence. She knew this star. It was the eye of the shepherd's crook, the first to wake. Soon its companions would follow, tracing a gentle arc she had known since childhood. She watched them prick the deepening velvet, one by one, a slow and reliable promise kept every night since the world was young. Here was the lost lamb, huddled close to the horizon. There, the weaver's shuttle, arcing over the peak of the mountain. She recited their names silently, a litany she had spoken aloud to generations of children huddled by the fire, their faces wrapped in the flickering light. The stars were a tapestry she knew by heart, every knot and every thread familiar to her hands and her tongue. They were the grand celestial map of home, and their steadfast march across the sky was a comfort, a bulwark against the unnameable anxieties that darkness sometimes held. It was order, it was permanence. But tonight, as the Milky Way began to spill its pale dust across the heavens, a different feeling stirred within her. It was not a pang of sorrow, nothing so sharp or defined. It was a hollow ache, a whisper of longing that rose from a place she had long forgotten. She looked at the constellations, at the stories she had told 1,000 times, and felt the quiet weariness of the storyteller. Had she polished the tales so smooth with repetition that she could no longer feel their original wild texture? The awe that had once seized her, that had made her small and breathless beneath this same sky, had been tamed into a craft, a well-worn tool. The stars, once breathing entities of fire and mystery, had become mere points in a diagram, signposts for a narrative she could recite in her sleep. The wonder had become work. Her mind drifted back, pulled by that faint, yearning thread. She was a girl again, small and slight, standing beside old Ilara, whose hands were as gnarled as olive roots and whose voice held the rustle of dry leaves. Ilara had not taught her the names of the stars, not at first. She had taught her their feeling. She remembered the woman's strange lesson, her fingers not pointing, but cupped, as if to catch rainwater from a cloudless sky. "Don't just look at the light, little bird," Ilara had rasped, her breath smelling of chamomile and beeswax. "Feel it. Each one has traveled so far to touch you. Can you feel its journey? Each star is not a thing, but a story arriving." In that moment, Lyra had understood. It was a profound, shivering connection, a sense that the light landing on her face was a missive, a tiny whispered secret from the cosmos itself. The night sky had been a living page, and she, a rapt reader. Where had that feeling gone? It had not vanished in a storm, but had faded like ink in the sun, bleached by years of turning the profound into the palatable, the mystery into a moral. Her gaze, soft and unfocused, settled on the cluster known as the Seven Sisters, a tight, shimmering knot of light. She knew the story she told of them. 7 daughters fleeing a great beast, turned to stars to keep them safe forever. But tonight she did not see 7 figures. She did not see the beast in the dark space around them. Her eyes traced the impossibly fine lines of light, and for a fleeting, weightless moment, a new thought brushed against the edge of her mind. She saw them not as 7 scattered jewels, but as 7 luminous stitches in a single invisible thread. The thought was unbidden, formless. It wasn't a story, but an intuition. If they were stitches, what needle had pulled them through the vast, dark fabric of the night? Who was the weaver? The question did not demand an answer. It simply hung there, a phantom touch against her soul, delicate and strange. It was a sensation not of knowing, but of almost knowing, a glimpse into a depth she had long ceased to look for, a hint that behind the familiar tapestry she had so often described, another, more intricate, was still being woven. Chapter 3. The day did not end so much as it dissolved. Light, thinned and weary from its long hold on the sun-baked earth, bled out into the edges of the sky, leaving behind a wash of bruised violet and the soft grey of cooling embers. The olive groves, whose leaves had been sharp silver daggers in the noon heat, now softened into a single deep shadow, a place that held the memory of warmth like a sleeping animal. A coolness rose from the stone terrace where Elara sat, a scent of dust and wild thyme and the promise of night. Below, in the gentle fold of the valley, the village began to prick the darkness with a small, hesitant gold of oil lamps, each a tiny anchor against the coming tide of black. But Elara preferred this slow surrender, this gossamer veil of twilight that softened the world's hard edges. She leaned her head back against the rough-hewn wall of her dwelling, its familiar grit a comfort against her skin, and watched the first stars emerge, shy and impossibly pure, into the deepening indigo. A sound, no more than the scuff of a worn leather sandal on the gravel path, drew her from her reverie. It was Lyra, a girl from the village whose hands, like her spirit, were never quite still. She was a weaver, known for the speed of her shuttle, the swiftness with which she could turn a bale of raw wool into a finished cloak. But her work, though fast, held a certain tension, a hurry in the weave that spoke of a mind already leaping to the next task. She stood at the edge of the terrace now, a silhouette against the last amethyst light, her fingers pleating the edge of her simple tunic. She carried with her a quiet hum of dissatisfaction, a yearning that had no name but lived in the restless energy of her limbs. She did not look at Elara at first, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. The patterns, she began, her voice soft, yet frayed at the edges like an overwrought thread. In the loom, even when the light is good, sometimes the pattern is lost. You see the whole, but the beauty of a single thread, it disappears. How do you find it again, Elara? How do you see what is right there in front of you when the light grows dim? Elara's own hands, resting in her lap, were still. She had seen this same searching in so many eyes over the years, a hunger for a map when all one has are the stars. She did not answer directly, but raised a slender arm, her finger pointing not with the force of a teacher, but with the gentle grace of an offering. "Look there," she whispered, her voice a low thrum that seemed to harmonize with the burgeoning night. "Just above the crest of the hill, not the bright ones. Look for the smudge of light, like breath on a cold stone, or a cluster of dewdrops scattered on dark silk." Lyra followed her gesture, her brow furrowed in concentration. And then she saw it, a faint, shimmering cluster, so delicate it seemed the next breeze might carry it away. It was not a grand, singular fire like the other stars, but a gathering, a whisper of light. "They are sisters," Elara said, her voice weaving a story into the air as surely as Lyra wove thread. "7 of them, though on most nights you can only see 6. They are not warriors or queens who demanded the sky's attention with fire and fury. They are quieter than that. They dance together, holding fast to one another as they travel the great dark loom of the heavens. Their light is not a proclamation, but a shared secret. It has traveled so very far to reach us, Lyra, and yet it arrives with its softness intact. They teach us that there is a strength in holding together, a beauty in a light that does not need to shout to be seen. They are a pattern of kinship against the vast, lonely dark. Ilara spoke, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The chirping of the cicadas became a soft percussion to her words. As the story unfurled, a profound change began to work its way through Lyra. The restless energy that had thrummed in her veins started to quiet, the frantic beat of her own thoughts slowing to the gentle rhythm of Ilara's telling. She looked up at the shimmering cluster, and the points of light were no longer just dots in the void. She could almost see them, the ethereal figures in their endless, graceful dance, their light a gossamer veil of memory and connection. A stillness she had not felt since she was a small child settled deep in her bones, a feeling of profound and simple peace. It was as if, in the vast and silent loom of her own soul, she had just found a lost precious thread, a thread of pure silver, woven of wonder itself, that could change the entire design. She was not just looking at the sky, she was seeing it, truly seeing it for the first time. And in the giving, Ilara received. As the story left her lips, a warmth bloomed in her chest, a gentle, spreading heat like an ember blown back to life. For too long she had held these old truths within her, guarding them like a miser's hoard. She saw now that they were not meant to be kept, but to be spun and shared, cast out into the darkness to find the hearts that needed them. They were not her stories, but the sky's, and she was merely a vessel, a caretaker. In lighting a small lamp for this restless girl, she felt her own path, which had seemed so shadowed and solitary of late, become illuminated once more. The story ended. The night was deep now, a velvet cloak studded with diamonds. A comfortable, weighted silence settled between the two women, punctuated only by the chitinous song of the cicadas and, far off, the plaintive bleat of a goat settling for the night. Lyra said nothing more. She did not need to. The tension had fallen from her shoulders, and her gaze, fixed on the heavens, was soft and full of a quiet awe. Her hands were finally still. Ilara looked from the girl's rapt face to the sky and back again, and saw the same light reflected in both. Above them, the seven sisters gleamed, a silent, shimmering testament, weaving the small woman and the young girl and the ancient stones into the vast, breathing tapestry of the cosmos. Chapter 4. The heart of the night had claimed the hill. What was once a clear, crisp blue deepened now into an ink of immeasurable depth, a velvet that absorbed all sound save the softest whispers of the world. A breeze, cool and kind, moved through the silvered leaves of the olive trees, each one a small, shivering mirror for the starlight. It carried the scent of wild thyme crushed underfoot hours ago, a memory of the day's warmth now offered to the dark. The fire, which had danced with such vigor, had settled into a soft arterial glow, a nest of embers breathing light onto the ancient stones and the faces gathered there. Shadows stretched and swayed, long silent dancers performing a forgotten rite. Lyra's hand, resting on the cool earth, was a map of soft wrinkles in the firelight. She raised it, not with her usual theatrical flourish, but with a slow, deliberate grace, as if lifting something of great weight. Her finger traced a path through the heavens, a gesture that seemed to gather the scattered dust of distant suns. "There," she said, her voice a low murmur, not the resonant bell it usually was. It was a sound that seemed to cling to the stillness rather than break it. "Do you see her?" Andromeda, a faint chain of jewels cast upon the dark. Young Elara, her chin resting on her knees, followed Lyra's gesture, her eyes wide with the patient wonder of youth. Old Theron, a silhouette of steadfast quiet, simply watched Lyra, his gaze as soft and steady as the embers. Lyra began the tale, but the familiar cadence was gone. A subtle tremor, a hesitation, frayed the edges of her words. She spoke of the princess bound to the jagged rock, her words painting the scene not in bold colors, but in muted, sorrowful tones. She spoke of the cold salt spray on skin, the unforgiving bite of the iron chains, the ceaseless lament of the waves against the shore. She described Andromeda's long, lonely vigil, waiting for a dawn that promised only the monstrous shadow of her fate rising from the sea. As she spoke, her own gaze seemed to drift past the constellation, past the farthest stars, into a landscape only she could see. A quiet, palpable melancholy, foreign to the grand drama of the myth, began to seep into her telling. It was an overlay of dust and memory, the quiet sorrow of a life half-lived, of a dream allowed to wither on the vine. The jagged rock became a familiar stone she had carried in her own heart for decades. The chains were not of iron, but of silences, of choices unmade and paths untaken. She was describing a binding she knew not from legend, but from the inside out, a quiet knot of regret she had learned to live with. So deeply woven into the fabric of her being, she no longer felt its constant, subtle pull. It was Elara who felt the shift. The girl, whose innocence was a kind of lens that focused on the purest truths, tilted her head. Her voice, when it came, was as soft as the whisper of the olive leaves. "Did Andromeda truly believe she would be saved, Lyra?" she asked, her eyes still on the storyteller's shadowed face. "Or was it the knowing of being bound that was the true fear?" The question was a gentle, inquisitive touch, yet it landed in Lyra's soul with the force of a revelation. It stilled the flow of her words, pulling her back from that distant inner sea of memory. For a long moment she was silent. The fire pulsed, a slow, rhythmic beat, casting shadows that deepened the hollows of her cheeks, then filled them again with a soft, forgiving light. A vulnerability, rarely seen, flickered across her features. She did not answer Elara directly. When she spoke again, a new current ran through her voice, something raw and quiet and achingly real. She continued the tale, telling of Perseus's arrival, of the battle with the beast, of the final triumphant rescue. But the words she chose were not for the hero. They were for Andromeda. She spoke of the moment the chains fell away, the sound of metal on stone, echoing in the sudden quiet. She described the princess's first trembling steps on legs that had forgotten how to walk freely, the feel of a gentle hand guiding her away from the rock that had been her entire world. The words were laced with a yearning so profound, so deeply personal. It was as if Lyra were narrating not a myth, but her own unarticulated prayer for release. It was the telling of a freedom she had only ever imagined. The air on the hillside grew thick with a new intimacy, a silent understanding that passed between the three of them like a shared breath. There was no need for questions, no room for prying. The quiet attention of Ilara and Theron was its own form of solace, an embrace woven from stillness and starlight. Theron, seeing a faint shiver trace its way down Lyra's arms, reached over without a word and gently adjusted the heavy wool cloak around her shoulders. It was a simple paternal gesture, but it held within it the weight of a lifetime of friendship, a profound recognition of the sorrow she had finally, unknowingly, allowed to surface. Lyra finished the story, her voice now barely above a whisper, softer, more fragile than they had ever heard it, yet tinged with a nascent hope, like the first pale light of a dawn she had forgotten to look for. She fell silent and lifted her gaze back to the sky. The vast, indifferent canvas of stars no longer seemed so distant. They were not just stories now, not just markers for heroes and monsters. They were ancient, silent witnesses to this small, universal ache of being human, the vulnerability that binds and the resilience that, sometimes in the company of others, sets one free. She did not feel saved. She did not feel whole. But in the telling, in the sharing of this myth so deeply imbued with her own hidden grief, she felt the slightest loosening. A single stubborn thread in the knot she carried inside had been gently tugged. It was not freedom, not yet, but it was the possibility of it, a quiet stirring, a profound and hopeful anticipation for what the next night and the next story might bring, lingering in the cool, star-dusted air. Chapter 5. The night did not fall so much as it bloomed, an ink-dark flower opening its petals to reveal a dusting of cold, distant pollen. Ilara sat on the low stone wall that bordered the olive grove, the chill of the ancient rock seeping through the fine weave of her tunic, a welcome and grounding presence. Above, the sky was a familiar parchment, scribbled with the same celestial calligraphy she had known since childhood. But tonight, the script felt different. The light of the stars, usually a comfort, seemed to tremble with an unspoken question. A breeze, soft as a sigh, ghosted through the silver-grey leaves of the olive trees. It carried the scent of dry earth and the faintest memory of sun-warmed stone, a fragrance of endings and stillness. Within Ilara, a similar current stirred. A quiet disquiet, a hollow ache that had been carved out by the gentle echo of the day's conversations, the warmth of shared bread, the brief, kind touch of a stranger's hand. It was the hum of a yearning she could not name, a resonance with something lost, or perhaps something never quite found. Her gaze drifted upward, past the grand, sweeping gestures of the more boisterous constellations, and settled on a delicate, shimmering arrangement. Lyra, the celestial harp. She knew its story as she knew the lines on her own hands. The tale of Orpheus, whose music could charm the stones and trees, who descended into the underworld for the love of his lost Eurydice, his lyre the only proof of a love so profound it had challenged death itself. The myth was a beautiful, sorrowful thing, a story she had told countless times, her voice shaping the words like a sculptor coaxing a form from clay. But tonight, the myth felt thin, a gauzy veil over a deeper truth. Her mind, led by the sight of that celestial instrument, did not linger in the underworld of legend. Instead, It wandered back down the worn path of her own years, to a different night under these very same stars. The memory rose not as a sharp image, but as a warmth spreading through her chest, the way mulled wine warms the belly on a winter evening. She was a girl again, her bare feet dusty, her hand clasped in another, smaller hand. Cleo. The name was a forgotten taste on her tongue, honey and wild herbs. They had been sitting here, or somewhere much like it, sharing a piece of flattened bread, their heads tilted back in shared wonder. Cleo's giggle had been like the scattering of bright pebbles into a clear pool. "That one," Cleo had whispered, her finger tracing the shape of the lyre in the air, a clumsy, childish line. "That is the one you love best. You said its song is made of sadness and hope all at once." Ilara remembered the weight of that small hand, the absolute trust in it, the simple, uncomplicated miracle of companionship. The memory was not sharp with the acid of grief, but softened by the patina of time, imbued with a bittersweet tenderness that made her heart ache and swell simultaneously. The feeling was as real and present as the cool stone beneath her, as the soft rustle of the olive leaves. It was a single, perfect note plucked from the instrument of her life, and as she held that note, that warm living memory, and gazed up at the cold, ancient light of Lyra, something within her began to unfurl. A thread, gossamer fine and previously unseen, began to glow, connecting the small earthbound moment of her past to the vast celestial pattern above. The weaving. She had always spoken of the fates, of the gods, their looms casting the grand tapestry of myth and destiny across the heavens. But now she saw. She saw with a clarity that was less a thought and more a profound, soul-deep sensation. The weaving was not just theirs. The divine threads were but the warp, the vast, unchanging structure. The weft, the vibrant, textured, colorful threads that gave the tapestry its meaning, its warmth, its life, that was woven here on earth. It was woven from the quiet moments of human connection. It was the thread of Cleo's laughter. It was the shared bread, the kindness of a stranger, the silent, mutual awe of two children gazing at the stars. The true music of Orpheus's lyre was not just in the myth of his singular, heroic love. It was in every quiet expression of love, every bond of friendship, every shared glance of wonder that had ever been offered up to the night sky. The constellations were not just static figures of long-dead heroes and distant gods, they were vessels waiting to be filled with the enduring light of human emotion. A peace, deep and luminous as moonlight on still water, settled over her. The subtle weariness that had clung to her spirit for so long, the sense of being a mere custodian of fading stories, began to dissipate. It did not vanish in a rush, but rather unspooled gently, like a loosened knot, leaving in its place a quiet, radiant warmth. She felt a sudden, profound connection, not just to the marble temples and ancient scrolls she so cherished, but to the living, breathing current of experience that flowed through every soul in every age. The stars no longer felt like distant deities. They felt like mirrors, reflecting the light of a million small, brave human hearts. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the feeling saturate her being. The breeze on her skin was no longer a lament for what was gone, but a promise of what was still to come. When she opened them again, the sky had transformed. The pinpricks of light were not just burning gas and ancient legends. They were shimmering echoes of love, luminous testaments to friendship, the enduring collective song of the human spirit. A new resolve blossomed in her heart, as quiet and certain as a seed breaking ground. She would continue to tell the old stories, the grand myths, but she would weave them differently now. She would share not just the tale ascend the lyre, but the deeper truth within it. She would speak of the unseen threads that bind a child's hand to a star, a memory to a myth, and all of us, in our fleeting, wondrous lives, to one another. Chapter 6. The quiet that settles over the world in the hour before dawn is a different silence. It is not an absence of sound, but a presence of stillness, a deep and ancient hush that holds the memory of every night that has ever been. On the hillside, this stillness was a tangible thing, a cool weight in the air that carried the sharp, clean scent of wild thyme crushed underfoot, and the damp, loamy breath of the earth itself. The great celestial wheel had turned to its lowest, darkest spoke, and the stars blazed with a cold, clear ferocity. In a small pool of light cast by a single lamp, a circle of figures huddled, their breath pluming softly in the chill. The light caught the earnest, upturned face of the youth who had, night by night, become a fixture in this small congregation. It traced the lines of wisdom and weariness on the others, their forms softened by the shared warmth and the encompassing dark. At their center sat the storyteller. The rigid posture of earlier nights had eased, the shoulders relaxing into the curve of the familiar stone behind them. They were no longer a visitor to this hillside, but a part of it, as rooted as the gnarled olive trees that clung to its slopes. Their gaze, when it met the eyes of their listeners, was luminous, holding a depth that seemed to drink in the starlight and give it back, transformed. A final, resonant hush fell as they prepared to speak. Their voice, when it came, was not the voice of grand histories or heroic deeds. It was lower, softer, the sound of river stones worn smooth by centuries of current. "We have spoken of heroes and of gods," they began, their gaze drifting from the faces before them to the immense, spangled dark above. "We have traced the paths of lovers and beasts across the heavens. But I have one last story for you, and it is not about a single star, but about the threads that bind them all together. It is a story about the loom." Their hands, once gnarled and resting heavily in their lap, lifted into the lamplight. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if tracing invisible patterns in the air. "Look up," they whispered, and every head tilted back. The ancients saw a map, a cold chart of distant fires. But the truth is something warmer. The sky is not a map, but a tapestry. And it is a tapestry we are all weaving, even now. A profound warmth had entered their voice, a quiet, undeniable certainty that flowed like honey into the quiet spaces between the listeners. They say the great loom is always at work, its warp and weft the unseen forces of gravity and light. But the threads are spun from something else entirely. Every time a hand is offered in the dark, a shimmering filament of silver is spun and added to the weave. Every shared moment of quiet understanding, when two souls sit together and need no words, adds a thread the color of deep twilight. Each gentle act of kindness, a cup of water given without thought of reward, a cloak shared against the cold, these spin threads of the softest, warmest gold. Their hands moved, sketching the vast, slow work in the air. This is the living record, This is the truth of the night sky. It is not a chronicle of burning gas and distant dust, but an immense and intricate brocade of our own making, a testament to the light we shepherd within our own fragile hearts. The constellations are not just pictures, they are the knots where 1,000 threads of compassion have met and bound themselves together, creating a pattern of enduring light. As the last word faded, seeming to dissolve into the immense silence of the cosmos, a peace that was deeper than any they had ever known settled over the storyteller. It was a quiet plenitude, a warmth that had nothing to do with the lamp or the huddle of bodies, but that bloomed from within their own chest. The subtle melancholy, the familiar ghost of solitude that had so often walked beside them, the thin, keening note of a purpose not quite grasped. It was gone. It had not been fought or banished, but had simply dissolved, like morning mist meeting the first rays of the sun. They understood then. Their role was not merely to recount the old myths, to be a vessel for stories that were already written. It was to mend, to reweave the human heart back into the grand cosmic narrative. The true star-weaving had not been a recitation of constellations named by forgotten ancestors. It was this small circle, this shared breath, the gentle rekindling of light within themselves and in those who came to listen. And that light, they knew with a certainty that settled into their very bones, was inextinguishable. The deepest indigo of the dome above had begun to soften at its eastern edge, a faint, hopeful wash of pearl and dove grey. A single distant hoot from an owl in the wooded valley below was the only punctuation in the stillness. The storyteller looked down at their hands, resting now in their lap. They no longer saw only the cartography of age, the raised veins and weathered skin. They saw vessels that had learned to cup the ephemeral glow of human connection and offer it, warm and living, to another. Their gaze lifted, passing over the faces of their listeners, each one a small, soft study in lamplight and drowsy understanding. Then they looked up to the vast expanse of the sky. It was no longer a collection of myths to be explained. It was a mirror, reflecting the quiet wisdom and boundless capacity for love held in the small circle below. In that moment, the storyteller felt utterly complete. Not an observer of the tapestry, but a single luminous thread woven inextricably into its grand and beautiful design. And so, under the quiet stars, they found their peace. May you find yours as well. Good night. What simple craft or quiet moment brings you peace? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments.